An avoidant feels instant regret when you mirror their emotional distance, but with a twist. And it's that twist that no one ever talks about. And to illustrate that point, I'd like to play a game. It's called Who's Really in Control? I'm going to ask you 3 quick questions, and I want you to answer in your head. Ready? Question 1. When an avoidant partner pulls away, who usually feels like they're in control of the relationship? It's the avoidant, right? They leave the relationship, they create distance, you're left wanting more. All right, let's move on to question 2. When you match their emotional distance, does that put you back in control? Not really. It's more like a stalemate. They're waiting for you to make a move. You're waiting for them to make a move. Question 3. Now here's the twist. What happens if you become unavailable first before they even get a chance to pull away? Well, that flips the script entirely. That's when regret kicks in for them because they never saw it coming, and they lose the power to distance themselves on their terms. Let me show you how a typical breakup with an avoidant goes. This is my world-famous death wheel. It basically charts the entire experience of a relationship from an avoidant's point of view from start to finish, and then start again. There are 8 stages to it. They want someone to love them, they found someone, their troubles are over, then they get triggered, then they start thinking of leaving, then they actually leave, then they're so happy that they left, then they start to feel lonely, then they feel sorry for themselves and wonder why they can't ever find the right person. And the avoidant goes through these 8 stages time and time again. It's an endless, inescapable cycle for them. But here's something I don't often talk about with the death wheel. At every point, they are the ones in control. They're choosing when to leave. They're choosing when to push you away. And they are choosing when to let you back in, always on their terms. In other words, they're active participants that essentially propel the death wheel forward. But here's something else I don't talk about. The victims of the death wheel also have their own interesting death wheel. This is what I like to call the anxious death wheel. Like the avoidant one, there are 8 stages to it. The anxious person wants someone to love them. They find someone. They decide they'll make that entire person their focus. They begin to sense that their partner is pulling away. They're broken up with. Then they decide they'll do everything in their power to win this person back. It doesn't go so well, and then they feel completely alone, and they wonder if they'll ever even find the right person for them. And just like the avoidant death wheel, the anxious person or the victim of the avoidant gets caught in this loop, and it's sort of inescapable. Unlike the avoidant death wheel, the anxious partner isn't in control. At no point during this entire process are they actually focused on moving on or healing themselves. Instead, they're stuck in a cycle of reacting to the avoidance actions. Their entire world revolves around trying to win back someone who's already emotionally distanced. Every attempt to close the gap just pushes the avoidant further away. And so the anxious person stays trapped, repeating the same patterns, prolonging their own suffering, and never truly gaining control over their own emotional well-being. They wait for the avoidant to make the next move, believing that their happiness depends on the avoidant coming back. And yet we know 2 things need to happen if you want an avoidant to feel instant regret. You're going to have to mirror their emotional distance, and you have to do it in a way so that you become unavailable before they even have a chance to become unavailable. All right, let's focus on the first thing for now. So thing number 1, mirroring their emotional distance. I'm not the first person that came up with this idea. Mirroring as a technique has been in the psychology community for years. Check this out. This is an excerpt from a Vice article I stumbled across. In a 1999 study, psychologists defined mirroring, also known as the chameleon effect, as non-conscious mimicry of the postures, mannerisms, facial expressions, and other behaviors of one's interaction partners. It's been long touted as a strategy that successful people can employ strategically to show their engagement during job interviews or at work, because research has shown that intentional mirroring can positively influence the way someone is perceived. I think it's that last sentence that holds relevance here. When you mirror an avoidant's emotional distance, you're not just matching their behavior, you're subtly influencing how they perceive you. Think of it like this. Let's pull up the anxious death wheel. This is how many avoidants are expecting their partners to react on the outset of a breakup. Except you're different. Instead of appearing needy or desperate, you're projecting the same emotional detachment that they're kind of comfortable with. This shift in perception completely changes the dynamic. By mirroring their withdrawal, you become more mysterious, more controlled, and ultimately more desirable in their eyes because you're no longer chasing them. You're showing them that you can exist without needing their validation, and that's where the power lies. But there's still something bugging me about this. Why? Why does this work? Is it the whole validation thing I just said? No, I think there's more to it than that. When we talk about dismissive avoidance, we're dealing with core wounds that are largely unconscious. From an early age, they learn to disconnect from their emotions as a survival mechanism. Often, dismissive avoidance grew up in environments where emotional needs were just not consistently met, so they adapted by suppressing their feelings to avoid the pain of unmet expectations. Over time, this emotional suppression becomes second nature, and they learn to numb themselves to deeper emotional experiences, leading to wounds that exist below the surface outside their conscious awareness. As an adult, this pattern continues. Rather than confront their emotions or feelings of vulnerability, dismissive avoidance will bury them further, leaving those core wounds unresolved and hidden. Basically, they've learned their entire lives to suppress what's within. So when a relationship ends, they don't consciously feel regret right away. Instead, they push it down deep into their unconscious, avoiding the pain just like they avoid intimacy. But here's the catch. Those unconscious wounds don't stay buried forever. Over time, when they feel safer, those emotions do begin to surface, and that's when the regret hits. By mirroring their emotional distance, you're unknowingly tapping into this process. You're not just validating their need for space, you're allowing them the time and safety to process what they have been avoiding. Eventually, their unconscious wounds catch up with them, and then the regret becomes unavoidable. That's why mirroring works. It speaks to their hidden, unprocessed feelings. But mirroring is only one part of this whole equation. So we just covered the mirroring their emotional distance part. Next, we have to cover the important twist that everyone forgets. You have to do it in a way so that you become unavailable before they even have a chance to. I'd like to show you a comment I found on a breakup subreddit about regret. As an avoidant, I do regret. My fatal flaw is not realizing what I have until I lose it. It's a very selfish and self-sabotaging mindset to be in, and I'm trying to shake it and work towards a more secure attachment style. Okay, keep that in mind. Let's read an excerpt from Attached. One of the consequences of devaluing your romantic relationships is that you often wake up long after the relationship has gone stale, having forgotten all those negative things that annoyed you about your partner, wondering what went wrong and reminiscing longingly about your long-lost love. Let's do one more. Let's look at free to attach. Avoidants are free to long for an ex once that person is unavailable, out of the relationship, and typically out of contact, so they are untouched by actual engagement, and their deactivation systems aren't triggered. But there's actually more. A little bit below that quote is the following. An ex being truly unavailable may even produce a perverse enjoyment. They are at liberty to fully miss and think wistfully about them, while it also confirms their self-belief people won't stick around them. Sometimes in relationships, they may imagine their partner with another to trigger this. So we have 3 resources all saying varying degrees of the same thing. Number 1, we have an actual avoidant admitting that they don't realize what they have until they lose it. Number 2, we have Attached saying it's not until the relationship has gone stale that they reminisce. And number 3, we have Free to Attach saying avoidants don't allow themselves to long for you until you become unavailable. But there's still something missing in my mind. All of this tells us one thing. Avoidants don't start longing for you until they believe they've truly lost you. But here's the catch. Longing and regret are not the same thing. Longing is about desire. Regret, on the other hand, involves an acknowledgement of loss and personal failure. It's the realization that their actions caused them to lose something they actually needed or valued. Avoidance can feel the pull of longing without fully processing regret. So what's the missing piece? Well, that's where the twist comes into play. Remember, an avoidant feels instant regret when you secretly become unavailable before they even have a chance to. In other words, regret only happens when they are forced to confront the consequences of their detachment. When you become unavailable before they even have a chance to pull away, they're hit with an unexpected emotional reaction. So let's go back to our death wheel for a moment here. For the avoidant, there are 8 stages, but like I said, they're always the ones in control of propelling it forward. They're always the ones pulling it, choosing when to leave and when to emotionally detach. But there's a critical point in the cycle, stages 6 and 7, where the avoidant starts to feel lonely and sorry for themselves. And it's during these stages that their sense of control starts to falter. They expect that you're still available, waiting in the wings, hoping for reconciliation. After all, it's what they've come to expect. One look at our anxious death wheel proves that. Now here's the twist. If during these stages they suddenly realize that you've moved on quickly, faster than they anticipated, it disrupts their entire process. This triggers a wild emotional reaction. They're no longer in control of the narrative. Instead of being the one who's detached, they're faced with the reality that you detached first. This unexpected shift causes them to panic, and it's often when the seeds of regret are planted. They're left wondering if they misjudged this situation and made a mistake. And to prove this point, I'd like to use real clips from an interview I did. So this is an interview I did with a woman named Lee. She got her dismissive avoidant ex back, but only after finding herself. Check it out.
Interestingly enough, the first time we actually talked on the phone was 6 months to the day of us breaking up.
Interesting.
That's kind of interesting.
Well, how are you feeling during it though? So obviously you go through this period of no contact and texting for a long period of time, but like when you get to that phone call phase, how are you feeling? Do you feel like, do you still want him back at that point, or are you just kind of like, okay, whatever happens, happens?
Well, and that is it. Like, so I did the 45 days, and then after the 2 weeks, I kind of was like, okay, do I want him back?
Yep. That's the secret sauce of everything.
I'm a wonderful person, and there is no way that a wonderful person is going to be single forever. So that was really it. That was when I knew. It was like I had to be willing to let him go and let go of the idea of what he was and who he was. Because if I maintained holding on to that idea of who he was and what he was, I don't think that we could have continued this second relationship.
Now, Lee's story is a perfect example of the twist that we're talking about. By the time she reached out to her ex, she had already gone through the process of letting him go. She had detached emotionally before he even had a chance to realize it. And that's the key. When Lee moved on, she unknowingly interrupted the ex's whole avoidant death wheel cycle. Instead of waiting for him to come back, she made peace with the situation. And this is what triggered that emotional shift in her ex. He was no longer the one in control, and it forced him to confront the reality that he had misjudged her willingness to move on. This disruption is exactly what plants the seeds of regret and avoidance. Remember, this isn't just about longing anymore. It's about this deep gnawing feeling that they might have made a mistake. They realize, often unconsciously, that their need for control and avoidance led them to lose something they didn't know they needed until it was too late. The key aspect to everything that I'm talking about here today is timing, and that's the aspect that almost everyone gets wrong. If you misjudge the timing and wait too long, the avoidant doesn't experience regret. They simply complete another revolution around the death wheel. They'll move on, feeling justified in their decision to detach. That's why it's essential to move on or let go before they do. That's what Lee did right, quite frankly. She moved on before her ex had a chance to fully detach. By the time they reconnected, she had already created emotional distance and was no longer holding on to the hope of getting him back. I mean, look at her exact words.
I had to be willing to let him go and let go of the idea of what he was and who he was.
This shift forced her ex to confront the reality that he was no longer in control of the situation, and that's when the regret began to creep in. Lee's timing disrupted his usual cycle, planting the seeds of doubt and making him realize what he had lost before he even knew he had lost it. You have to make your exit before they even realize what's happening. By doing so, you disrupt their cycle, and it's that disruption that triggers regret. If you wait until they've fully detached, the emotional window closes and any chance of them realizing their mistake disappears. Timing is everything here. Knowing when to pull back can be the difference between them feeling longing or true regret.